Mrs. Reed.
This week we will be learning how to embroider, and we will create a design of our choosing. In your embroidery kit, you have a piece of burlap, a sewing needle, and embroidery floss. To keep the edges of your burlap from unraveling, you need to secure them with either masking tape, or you can glue around the edges with some squeeze glue or hot glue and allow some time for it to dry. You can put wax paper or foil under your burlap so that the glue doesn't leak through the other side. And while that dries, you might want to start thinking about what you want your design to be. It's better if it's kind of a simple design, like an initial or a simple flower. Big simple shapes work best. Less is more. I decided to do a Valentine's candy heart for my design, and I sketched it out on my burlap using a light colored marker after I was done practicing on paper. So now you're ready to start stitching. You'll notice that the weave of the burlap is kind of wide. It leaves some big holes, so your embroidery floss is just gonna fall through it. To get started, what you need to do is loop around 2 of the holes, and just like what I'm doing here, and then flip over your burlap and tie the 2 pieces of embroidery floss together. After my knot is secured and trimmed, I'm going to start by doing a back stitch. The back stitch is the stitch I use most often. It is kind of like connecting the dots to stay on a line. So you can see how I'm trying to stay on my line, but I go backwards to connect my stitches, just like that. So I'll go forward a little bit and then back. This is why it's called the back stitch. And you will continue doing that as you make your way along the line that you drew. Now, embroidery is not a quick art. It does take some time, but once you get the hang of it, you can sort of tune out and the repeating process, the repeating motion of your hand going in and out of the fabric, it's pretty soothing and relaxing. So once you get the hang of it, you can kind of tune out. It's almost kind of calming and meditative. Eventually you will run out of floss. To add more, I cut about an arm's length of floss. Too long kind of becomes too much to manage, so I usually cut about an arm's length at a time, and then I put the 2 ends together of my old floss with my new floss, make a little loop around my finger, and pull the 2 ends through the loop. So then I can continue stitching as if it's one long piece of floss. As you're stitching, keep in mind that you're not pulling too tight. If you pull too tight, sort of like with weaving, it can warp your and pull and squeeze your artwork in a way that wouldn't be good. So as you're stitching, you want it to pull it tight enough that it's not loose, but you also don't want to pull so tight that you see the burlap stretching and squeezing. So keep that in mind. You don't need to pull too much. Next, I wanted to show you how to finish off your stitching if you're done and you're ready to tie a knot to it so it doesn't unravel. What you're going to do is you're gonna flip over your burlap so you're looking at the back side, wiggle your needle under a little bit of burlap and floss that you just stitched, And wrap the floss around your needle maybe 4 or 5 times and then pull the string through. This will form a little knot and then you can trim off the edges. I'm making another knot around my first one just by looping around it and pulling the string through the loop. You don't have to do this, it just makes it sort of like a double knot. For my letters, I'm still using the back stitch, but I wanted them to stand out a little bit, so I doubled up on the embroidery floss, and here I'm stitching with 2 pieces of thread. For my background, I wanted to put a few stars in there, so I decided to do the star stitch, which is sort of like crisscrossing some lines of thread to create a star design. I repeated that a few times around my heart. The final stitch I wanted to show you is the satin stitch. This is what you want to do when you want to fill up entire shapes with color. So you can see how I've already started that along the edge of my heart to sort of give it a 3D look, how it's sort of filled in with some red. And to do that, you pretty much just stitch back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until the sections of your burlap are filled up. You do not need to loop it around to the back side of your burlap though. If you look at the back side of my embroidery, you'll see that it doesn't look like the front. So you kind of switch back and forth without looping around on the back. That way you're not wasting the floss and most of the color is showing up on the front. So there you have it. My embroidery took me about an hour and a half to complete, but I am really proud of it. Embroidery is not a quick art, but it can be a lot of fun once you get the hang of it. I wanted to share with you some artists who take embroidery to the next level. These are created by Simone Saunders, who uses a rug making technique to make these beautiful, colorful artworks. Sierra Leroy embroiders on a smaller scale on little embroidery hoops, but I love her artwork. It's very cheerful and colorful. Ruth Miller makes these astoundingly realistic portraits using thread. They almost look like paintings. Can you imagine how long those took her to complete? Victoria Villasana takes a really unique approach. She actually embroiders on photographs. So she's adding colorful detail to those black and white photos. I'm so excited to see what you create with your embroidery.